Hello, this is Lynn Fraser with the Kiloby Center for Recovery, and I'm here with Scott Kiloby, the director and CEO of the center. So we've covered a lot of topics over the last few years about trauma and recovery and addiction. And today we're going to talk about the Kiloby inquiries and the evolution of that from the living inquiries through opening the Kiloby Center 6 years ago.
So describe the history of kind of where the Kiloby inquiries came from. You kind of have to start from how I got into teaching in the first place. I've shared before, had an awakening experience in 2007, very, very profound shift, changed my life dramatically, left the practice of law, didn't intend to be a teacher. I was more a creator, like a songwriter all my life. And so when I had the awakening, it was just about expressing it, just like, oh, just getting this out, a way of expressing, like almost like poetry. But then I realized after a while that I could I could talk in certain ways that I think could help other people that had been suffering. Because of my training as a lawyer, where you teach you how to be articulate, I learned that that skill could help me. And so it wasn't long after. I'm kind of a how-to guy. So like some people pick up spiritual books and they read them for the information or for the inspiration or to intuitively feel into them. But for me, it's like I'm a very sort of pragmatic or practical person. It's like, tell me how. I want to know how. I don't want to know what it's like to live in an awakened state. I don't want you to sit and just describe it to me. Tell me how. So that's been my mindset from the very beginning. So once I had the awakening experience, like a lot of people, I thought, well, now that this has happened, I'm not going to suffer anymore. I'm not going to get triggered. My life is going to be full of nothing but pure bliss and peace. And to be honest with you, there was a lot of, and has been a lot of peace and bliss. And the shift really did make a big difference. But what I noticed is that whereas instead of that awakening experience being the end point, it really is the beginning because it's like a big light that comes on in your experience, and that light shines itself on everything that you hadn't seen before the awakening. So immediately, I needed something more than what was being offered out there. I looked around to try to figure out, really still kind of looking at some of my own issues as in after the awakening that were popping up. And the issues for me were things like there was like I've talked to you before, like a strand left of what I call the deficiency story of being unlovable. The awakening knocked a lot of it away, but it was still there, underneath everything. And then some trauma that I had not resolved by being bullied in sixth grade that we talked about, and 20-year drug addiction full of shame. And so there was all these things that the awakening helped free me from a lot of it. But because some of that conditioning is so strong, it just likes to hold on for dear life. And so I had to pull away from the kind of standard enlightenment teachings and try to become more practical to deal with these specific behaviors and patterns and triggers. So what got born out of that was the living inquiries, which was our first mindfulness training program, as you know, and you're an LI facilitator. And the inquiries were a way to explore, the nature of things, like to see that when we think we're seeing ourselves a certain way and that's how we think we really are, that the living inquiries show us that that's an illusion, that that's not, it's just a set of thoughts or feelings that we're identifying with, and that through those living inquiries, we can pull apart those thoughts and feelings and show you that that's not what you are. It's just like a movie playing in front of you in your awareness. And, for many years, you and I did that kind of work, and we still do. I still do the living inquiries with people. It's a very powerful method, in fact. But what happened naturally is that as we opened the Kiloby Center about 6 years ago, for the first time, I started to meet with a different population of people. Before, a lot of the times, it was people who were spiritual seekers, seeking enlightenment that were coming to me. There weren't a lot of people coming to me specifically to work on trauma or human issues. So with the Kiloby Center, we started getting people who really had serious trauma. I mean, sometimes extreme trauma, sometimes, maybe not so extreme trauma. Lots of shame, lots of shame. Deficiency stories that were driving addiction. But most of what we noticed is that when people don't have a background in mindfulness or meditation or a present moment awareness, and especially when they're coming right off of drugs or alcohol, it's a lot to ask for someone to sit there and to be quiet and still and look at very scary thoughts and to feel scary feelings. So, you know, I often say that the Kiloby inquiries, which is our second set of tools and program that we developed, was truly born out of necessity, in the sense that if we didn't find a way to help some of those people quickly get into this work and find a breakthrough, they could literally lose their life. I mean, on some of them, and we even lost a patient who wouldn't stay around long enough for us to help her learn these tools. So what we needed to do is we needed to make the tools much more accessible. So once sometimes I say to people, it's like I really believe that I could teach this to third graders and they would get it like that. And in fact, that's happened a couple of times where we've taught it to kids and they tend to get it real quick. But we feel like we've dumbed it down in the sense of made this self inquiry simpler, first of all. But in doing so, for me, it's helped. It's gone deeper for me on very specific stories. Like, whereas, like when you're resting as awareness throughout the day, there's a certain experiential thing that happens from that, a sense of openness and spaciousness and peace. But with these inquiries, they go right into areas of belief and patterns and stories, and they're very almost like surgical. And they break open and open up pathways that resting in awareness can't do or meditation can't do because they ask those penetrative questions. And so we had to ask those questions because we had to bring up the conditioning early and unhook these people from this conditioning early in treatment, because if we didn't, they were at risk of resuming use or what we call relapse, and then we lose them forever. So the new tools really were out of necessity. One, we had to make it more accessible. Two, it had to be very effective on these really deep strands of suffering that drive addiction, like shame and trauma and pressure and um, boredom and physical pain, things like that. That's how they were born. It's in the body more because one thing that I've realized, as I've shared in interviews with you, is that I've had spine pain for a number of years, but in the last 2 years, it's been really bad. So what is the gift that's been hidden in that awful experience is that I've had to go into my body and learn how to be with a very painful sensation, by reducing the resistance to it. I mean, if I didn't reduce the resistance to it, I'd been in much more pain than I was. So I had to learn how to do that. So it came out of necessity for one. So it learned I developed tools to, when I'm feeling into something in my body, at the very same time that I'm feeling into it, there's a process where the resistance is being reduced or eliminated at the same time. And so it's not just like you'll hear in teachings or meditation to sort of just feel that or rest with that or be with that. But what I noticed is that those very general instructions weren't specific enough to overcome some of the very unconscious resistance in the body, like the stuff that we don't even know that we're doing to try to. I heard someone say it's like your nervous system is worried. So if you have a contraction or pain, your system is worried about that, and so it's trying to do something with it on an unconscious level. So these new tools are there to quiet that unconscious resistance to whatever you're feeling so that you can get some movement or even get it to fall away more easily.
In-depth conversation about that, and we'll put the link to that on here so people can see that too.
Yeah. Yeah. And the second question on bypassing is a fascinating question because during the course of developing the Kilby inquiries, the bypassing question was in my mind the whole time that it was being developed, because bypassing, for those that you don't know, it's kind of like what you hear a therapist say, when they say avoidance or resistance. It's like we have in us this idea that there's some sort of quick route or magic pill that we can take or do to run around our pain, to get around it, instead of going through it and clearing it. And so what we've done, I think, since the beginning of LI, the first program, is we've built now two programs that I think are designed to keep bypassing from happening. I think the living inquiries do it also because the living inquiries allow you to be with everything that's coming up instead of turning away from the painful stuff. But what the Kiloby inquiries have done even more on bypassing is I really studied bypassing for a year. I mean, not literally every night reading about it, but going out and finding out what is it exactly. And there's a lot of talk about bypassing, and there's a lot of descriptions of different ways that you bypass. But what I needed to do was distill it down to what exactly are we trying to avoid or bypass? What is it? I mean, when I look around, I think it's not the chair in the room that I'm trying to bypass. It's not anything other than how I feel. That's what it is. So it's a feeling or a sensation that I might be feeling or I don't want to feel. So I try to find a way around it. And so people have challenged me on that part that avoidance comes from not wanting to feel. They've challenged me on this, and here's how I explain why I feel it comes from. But the bypassing is really about bypassing what we feel. If I have the thought that I'm the worst Christmas tree designer in the world, I don't feel anything from that. It's laughable. First of all, because I don't design Christmas trees, but mostly because there's no pain in my body when I say I'm the worst Christmas tree designer in the world. But let's say I was highly identified with being like a spiritual teacher or something closer to home. If I say that, I might feel pain over that. And it's because that thought is velcroed or connected to some emotion or sensation. So with the living inquiries or the Kiloby inquiries that were developed separately, we've put in there some tools that actually help you unhook from thoughts quicker. So, in other words, instead of just witnessing, sometimes people can't just witness thoughts because those thoughts get stuck there and they get somewhat re-traumatized. So we developed some tools and borrowed some tools from other methodologies that helped them unhook quicker from those thoughts. So here came a little bit of criticism towards us to ask us the question, is that bypassing? And that's when I started to study bypassing and find out where it was coming from. And then looking into my own experience and realizing that if I have the thought I'm the worst Christmas tree a designer in the world, there's nothing to bypass because I don't feel anything negative about it. But if I have the thought I'm the worst spiritual teacher and there's a feeling there, I might be motivated to try to bypass that feeling. So the body to me is where the bypassing happens. Therefore, the new work has to be focused in the somatic body in order to avoid the avoidance or to avoid the bypassing. And so that's really important for people with addictions because addiction is a bypass away from pain. But it's much broader than that. And even though you and I are talking about radical recovery, this kind of talk is helpful for almost everybody because even if you don't medicate and bypass by eating cookies or heroin, there are other ways that people bypass and avoid, which is like they become workaholics or they distract themselves or they compartmentalize their problems or they deny or ignore issues instead of facing the feeling. So this conversation about bypassing is in no way just limited to the topic of recovery by any stretch.
Right. So, can you bring in dissociation and the nervous system again? Because a lot of times we are trying to avoid fear or terror.
Yeah, there's different. I've seen it so many different versions of dissociation, so many different causes. It's like I remember a client who just was so utterly neglected by his parents and other important people in his life that as a protective mechanism he had to dissociate while being in the company of others just to survive. I mean, as a survival mechanism. Sometimes it's from trauma, a different kind of trauma, where something happened that was so painful that you literally kind of leave your body as a way not it's the ultimate bypass really dissociative. But when I see these things, it can be really triggering to be around someone who's dissociating because it feels like they're not there with you. But if you understand that they're just trying to survive, just like someone who drinks every day is trying to survive, then you can have compassion for them and you can see that it's not a good or bad thing or a right or wrong thing. And then you can just work on helping them not dissociate so much and own some of those feelings on their own side. And then again, once they own the feelings, not to bypass them and to move through them. It's not. It's describing it sounds like sounds like an easy process, but you know, you have to work towards that. It's not something that you can just do in the flash. Nobody can just get it done like that. But if you're open to it, it can be done.
And it can be quite dramatic when people experience that they can survive feeling,
Yeah.
and that in a few minutes it's gone. And it's
Yes.
wow, I can't believe I've been avoiding that so long. People tell me that all the time, and
I
that's
know.
been my experience too.
I know. I just remember the first time that I did inquiry with my current partner, Chester. He was really, really angry at the beginning. I don't know what we were talking about, but he was angry. I don't even think it was about me that time, but um, just with just a little bit of the KI, he's like, "How can that just drop away like that?" Like I was so pissed. Like, where did that go? And he's like, "How did you do that?" He was so amazed. And I think it's just because we're approaching this differently than therapy or counseling has ever done, and we're approaching it from more of like they would from the East. And so those of us in the West, we don't know those experiences that the East has unless we've tried them. We don't understand that we can actually do those kinds of tools to unhook because in the West, what we like to do is just try to talk our problems out, you know. But there's so many other ways and more effective ways to deal with your emotional issues than just to keep talking about them. And so he was just amazed that he could lose that anger so quickly without ever having to talk about what he was really angry about. And that was amazing. And you've seen it too. And when someone has, here's what I love about sessions. I've gotten into sessions a lot more lately because I'm seeing even more results. Um, and one thing I'm helping people with is that sometimes in the middle of a session, they'll have a really strong emotional release, like they just start crying. And I encourage it and I tell them, I've seen thousands of people cry. It's safe for you to cry here.
Mm,
And when they have that emotional release in the middle of it, sometimes it feels like to them like a regression, like, oh, what's wrong with me? And now I'm crying, now I'm upset. But to me, it's like striking gold because it's like now we've brought up the thing that you were bypassing for so long. You didn't want to feel this feeling. And now it's up here. And now we've got these somatic tools, these new somatic tools to help you be with it in a way that's manageable and then hopefully let go of it at that point. So it's fun to find those moments when you can finally bring up the thing that someone was trying to avoid for years and then help them through that. And then the feeling afterwards when they release that emotion and the energy that leaves and the lightness that is there is just
mhm,
unmistakable, you know.
mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
So
Not all deficiency stories are really like that if you notice. It's like it could be like you're standing in line and someone cuts in front of you at the department store and you get this feeling in your stomach like, well, who do you think you are? Or like it makes me feel like that I'm nobody, that you could just it's just those less irritations and triggers. For those, you don't have to learn really any tools other than when you see yourself thinking those thoughts and you notice that or if you feel that, it's just turn your awareness towards the thought and just look at it. Not its meaning, but the fact that it's there. And just let it be there for a few seconds until it kind of falls like a falling star and then just come back and be present to the moment and be present to any feeling that's there and just rest with that feeling. If you do that throughout the day, what you're doing is you're learning to meet every mild trigger with awareness so that it doesn't hang around. And then when you get the big triggers, like with me and Chester, then you sit down, you really unhook the thick many layers of that kind of triggering. So I think what we're going to talk about today probably is how to support yourself, um, because we've talked a lot about how you can go to facilitator to be guided, but what happens when you're on your own and you're triggered? And I think that's one of the topics is how can we help people with Kiloby inquiries. Well, one of the first things we noticed is that, people were coming in off the street, off of heroin or off of years of trauma work or 20 years of therapy, and none of them had any real background in just simply witnessing thoughts. And you told me to talk about the difference between witnessing and thinking, and I'm going to do that first, and then get me back on track to the question that you asked after that, because this is a really important question too. People were coming into the treatment center, and when we were talking to them about this work, they were using their mind too much. And so, because they'd been conditioned to use their mind for everything, and what we were trying to say is that we all have this built-in capacity to be aware of our thoughts, to absolutely just observe them rather than believe them just because they're arising. And that was very hard for people who were traumatized or who were just scared to be in treatment or didn't want to be in treatment, or they may have thought that this spirituality was woo woo, any number of reasons. And so we had to take the spirituality thing out of it almost. Like we had to say, forget, this isn't about spirituality. This is about not suffering anymore. We had to take any of the religious connotations. It's not about Buddha. It's not about anything. It's about you not suffering anymore. And so then we had to figure out a way to like to get their foot in the door of this work. Something very simple that they could see results right away to keep them in the work. And one of the first things we developed was something called simple inquiry, and I'll just show it to you right now. So with simple inquiry, you're going about this is something you can do during the day. You can this is some you don't have to wait for a strong trigger. So let's say I'm standing at the supermarket line and someone cuts in front of me, and I get that feeling of being like disrespected or something. Um, so I start to feel that trigger, and I know that I'm getting agitated. The first thing to know is to stop and notice that you are agitated or upset, right? Because a lot of people they'll operate on that upset, not even really knowing fully that they're upset.
Mhm.
Because many of us live in a low level, constant state of upset and anxiety, so they don't even recognize it. So the one thing is to start recognizing when your body starts to feel tight or anxious, or your mind starts racing, or you're focused on a person or a situation in a fixated way, is stop for a moment. Take a few deep breaths and just notice that you are triggered first. And there's all kinds of breath techniques, as you know, that you can do. But at least take a few breaths just to stop and get in your body and settle into the moment for a bit. And it's not going to feel comfortable because you're slightly triggered at least. But what you can do is you can turn your awareness towards that thought that's bothering you. Just watch it very briefly, let it fall, come back down and feel that feeling, right? But here's the problem. So we started to teach people that, and they couldn't do that. And the reason they couldn't do that is because they would watch the image, but because they had no background or practice in observing a thought until it falls away completely, the thought would just stay right there, and they would just stay fixated on it. So what we did, we said, okay, so if that thought is stuck right there, take your two fingers and start tapping continuously right at the top of the bridge of your nose between your eyes. And while you're tapping, focus only on the sound and the sensation of the tapping. And so if thoughts pop up during the process, you just kind of gently with your awareness, just notice them for a few seconds and then come back to the tapping for a longer period of time. Every time you come back to the tapping, you're getting that experience of no thought or the space between thoughts. So you keep tapping until those thoughts that were there have fallen away. And then that clears the mind so that the awareness is not focused up here so much. And then that gives space for then the awareness or the attention to come down into the body and to rest with the anxiety that's underlying that trigger. And then we have a bunch of tools, as you know, to help reduce and be with that anxiety. And so it as soon as we developed it, it just like took off because people could leave the treatment center that day. They got triggered by somebody. They stepped aside. They looked at the thoughts, the words, and the pictures that were making them upset. They witnessed them for a second. They tapped, and they came down and breathe and would breathe and feel. And maybe they'd have to do it a few more times, but then they would come back the next day and they'd be like, "Oh my God, why didn't somebody teach me this before?" It's so
It's
simple.
so powerful and so simple. Yeah.
It's so simple.
Mhm.
And it's not the answer to everything, but it's a simple way in to inquiry. You know,
Mhm.
it doesn't, it's not, simple inquiry is not necessarily going to by itself eradicate like really extreme trauma, but it's a really good foot in the door to understand that you don't have to process your problems through thinking anymore. You can process them a different way that's actually more effective to get rid of the emotional charge that's driving the thinking. And
Mhm.
that's the key. So simple inquiry was the first breakthrough. And then, of course, we developed some more, and I can explain any of them. I don't mind giving them away to people. I'll just tell you that as I give them away to you, practice them on your own and work with any trigger that it's useful for. But just know that there's some things that you're probably not going to be able to look at on your own, and that's things like trauma and deeply held shame and just those really deep core stories that we have a way of hiding from ourselves. So, but but the self support that we're teaching today, like the simple inquiry and other things, can go a long way just on their own when you're doing them on your own. So
When
the
people are
reverse inquiry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say when people are traumatized, they tend to have the experience of thoughts being really sticky. So to
Yeah,
have the experience of, I can actually do this simple thing and the thought goes away,
yeah,
that's really powerful.
it is powerful. And just to go back to you, people came to me and said, "Well, Scott, isn't that bypassing? Aren't you bypassing the thoughts?" And I said, yes, I am. Because real bypassing is not bypassing thoughts. Real bypassing is bypassing the feelings. I'm trying to clear the thoughts so that you can feel the feeling that you want to bypass. And then as soon as they heard that, they were like, oh, I see.
Mhm.
So that answered it for me.
Mhm.
Um, and it helps other people understand it.
The question also is, there's a couple things here. You talk about looking from awareness, which would be good to go into a bit, and also people disidentifying from their story. So, can you talk about how the inquiries work with that? If we really believe that we are those core deficiency beliefs, how do you work with that?
The way that we work on it in the Kiloby inquiries is we use something called reverse inquiry. So let's say that I come to you, you're my facilitator, and I come to you and I say, Lynn, all my life I believed that I was, that I'm a bad boy, that I'm a bad person. And so I grew up being the bad person, playing the role, getting attention for it and everything. And now, as an adult, it doesn't serve me very well because I used it as a child to get what I wanted, but now I'm just suffering because I think I'm a bad person. So instead of doing psychoanalysis on me, you're just going to have me say, you're gonna have me pull up the people in my life that made me feel like I was a bad person. Just look at them for a second in my awareness, like from my awareness, looking at those thoughts. And then you would have me say the opposite of what I believe. And so it'd be like, I'm a good person. And so when I say that, you're gonna instruct me not to believe that. It's not a positive affirmation. It's not like therapy where they try to reframe you into thinking that. The reason that you say I'm a good person is it so that all of that stuff inside you that's hiding that makes you believe you're a bad person comes into your awareness. Like it brings
Mhm.
up the unconscious stuff that you can't see. Because it's almost like picking a fight with the ego for
Right.
a health for a healthy reason though. It's like
Mhm.
you know your ego is hiding viewpoints that keep you believing that you're a bad person, but you can't see all those viewpoints because it's like there are animals hiding in the ground in the holes and they won't come out of their holes until
Right.
you wave the right food over the hole. And as soon as you do, they have to come out and
Right.
sort of, you know, check out what's going on. And so once you say that reverse inquiry where I have to say I'm a good person while looking at all of these people who've always made me feel like a bad person, all those animals come out of the hole to try to prove to me that I am a bad person. And
Oh,
then you lost me for a second there.
yeah.
Um,
Okay.
and then once those things are up, then we have ways of disidentifying from them to show you that you're not those thoughts and feelings, and that you're more like the presence that's here underneath that. That's how we do it in the KI way, and we keep doing it until there's just no until the person says I'm a good person, and either there's just nothing up coming up to disagree with it, or it's just a neutral kind of like I don't even really care if I'm a good or a bad person. And
Mhm.
then that's when they start to feel free, more free from that deficiency story. But the thing is that you have to do it a few times. You have to work with it because this is the long-standing conditioning. We've trained to be almost like an athlete. We've trained to feel deficient or lacking in our life all our life
Mhm.
since childhood development. So it's not reasonable to assume that you're going to have one session or two and all that's going to be gone.
Mhm.
But once you learn what we do and the methodology and you immerse yourself in it, over time, as you know, that story starts to fall away. And then once that story of deficiency starts to fall away, you start actually seeing yourself operate and act differently in the world and respond differently from different place. I mean, in my experience, it's been from much more honesty, much more authenticity,
Mhm.
um, much more intimacy. Um, not that I don't get triggered, I certainly do still, but that's what it does when you go deeply into that deficiency story. It frees you up to experience all those good things that relationship can contain instead of
Mhm.
just the petty triggers and the
Right.
jealousy and all the other stuff that comes up.
Mhm. It's an interesting experience because the mind really does say, "Hey, this is that's not true. You're not a good person, and this is why." So it
Yeah,
brings up the evidence.
yeah. I
Yeah.
often say it's like there's it's not really true. It's like there's an attorney inside you waiting to make the full argument. All you have to do is say, "Counsel, are you ready?" And the way you do that is you reverse what you believe.
Right.
So if I believe I'm a loser, if I say I'm a winner, here comes that attorney in, so to speak, to say, "Judge, here's all the proof that this person is a loser, and it's all in front of your awareness now." And then that's perfect because now that it's in our awareness, it's no longer hiding from us, and we can just sit there and be with it until it kind of falls away from us. And something I learned also, and I have no scientific proof for it, is that the more that you look directly at a thought, the more you diminish your power to believe it. And the moment you take your attention away from a thought, you increase your ability to believe it. It's that simple. So
Mhm.
it's like, if I believe I'm a loser, just the words I'm a loser, if I have that thought come through and I kind of dismiss it and kind of keep it out of my awareness, then it's believed, right? But when it comes up, if I bring it into my awareness, either through visualizing the word or hearing it from awareness, and I just let it be there without indulging it or analyzing it or adding anything, I just hear it come and go, um, over and over, then it stops hooking me after a while, it just stops hooking me. So, what I encourage people to do is not just work with facilitators to go into these deep, deep issues that are hidden in the unconscious, but just throughout the day. Like when you hear your mind say things that are deficiency story related, just
Mhm.
turn your awareness towards them, acknowledge them for a second or two in this return to the present moment, and see if there's anything that you need to feel and be with. Because most of our daily deficiency story triggers don't actually double us over in overwhelming pain. It's like a feeling that we have, like a feeling of like less than or something.
Mhm.
Whereas sometimes we're really overwhelmed by the trigger. And when we're really overwhelmed by the trigger, the formal inquiries that we have are good for that. But during the day, just simply watching thoughts and just letting them come and go and resting in awareness is a really powerful tool for stepping outside of that false deficiency story. So that's what I've been coaching people in my sessions and my training is not just, and we're going to get to this, it's not just about me facilitating you. It's about me coaching you how to help yourself on your
Mhm.
own. And since I've been doing that, people have been evolving or transforming more quickly, um, because the work is easier now and they're able to do it every day, whereas before it was more difficult.
Mhm.
But the way that I use it in this way was it's instead of the winner loser thing, what I was believing back then was that I can't say and do what I want. Okay. So when you feel like you can't say and do what you want, you often will feel a throat contraction.
Mhm.
The emotion gets stuck there. You can't speak it. And so that was there for the first 4 decades or more of my life.
Mhm.
And I, with the living inquiries, I just couldn't find the right way in to free that. But with the Kiloby inquiries, I just fashioned a reverse inquiry that said I can say what I want and I can do what I want. So what I would do is I would put up the people in my life that throughout my life had made me feel like I couldn't say or do what I wanted to do. And then I would say, I can say what I want and I can do what I want. And then this upheaval of stuff would come up and say, no, you can't either, because
Right.
they're not going to love you. They're not going to like you. They're going to get mad at you. There's going to be conflict, and conflict means you're unlovable. You see, it ties back to that deficiency story. So I stayed with that inquiry for a number of days. Like I lived in that inquiry for a number of days. And then after that cleared, again, a huge life shift, changing relationships, changing everything. Creativity opened up. Um, I created an app. I don't know, I've told you about this, and we're creating more things now. It just opened up something. It opened up my voice, my expression more, my creativity,
Mhm.
and it was only because I was able to ask that very specific or say that very specific statement that I can say and do what I want, because I had to pick a fight with my ego to make it come out and show me all of its blocks. And until I could do that, I was still at the mercy of that conditioning that kept me repressed and not
Right.
feeling like I could be myself.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the, analogy of picking a fight because otherwise it's just operating underground, and we hesitate, we play small, we don't know why.
No, you
Yeah.
don't know. You don't know until trauma's really moved through, until it's moved through. It's better just to keep looking at it and to see what's there until, and be more realistic about it and treat it like something that you have to work on for a while until you can move off of it. And I think people need to hear that, because we live in a culture that thinks that there is a magic pill,
Right.
and there isn't. And so we have to work sometimes on an extended basis with these things to get real results. Even if we have really simple tools, we still have to work on a
Mhm.
regular basis. Yeah. So, as you know, there's two elements to KI and LI, which is both rest and inquiry, right? So, a big part of um, both programs is resting as awareness, because that's what helps that shift into presence, that awakening happen. That part of it has to happen. And that's where people feel the biggest breakthroughs sometimes in the beginning, because they go from believing their story to like shifting into awareness. And that's a profound shift, and it leaves a mark on you. And you hear stories about that happening to people, and it seems like a really big deal. And it is, and it can be, but this is different. You can have that in this work, and that's part of this work for sure. But what we're trying to do with this work is we're not trying to ignore phenomena anymore. We're actually including the phenomena, like bringing it in and working through it, rather than trying to just stay in awareness all the time and keep all the phenomena out. And
Right.
that's what I like about the work, because it joins the sort of the absolute awareness type thing with the relative human, dirty, kind of gritty stuff that we all have to deal with, the shame and the everything else.
Mm. So, can you explain to people how they can go into awareness, how they can watch from awareness?
Yeah. I mean, it takes the readiness to want to live from the present moment, and if there's things in your life that are pulling you out of that, you're gonna have to examine that. For example, if you get more out of getting into the world and getting attention, or going and drinking, or if you're singularly focused on getting falling in love and getting in the right relationship or whatever, sometimes you get distracted from this practice. So you've got to really want to be done with suffering. There has to be something inside of you that motivates you to want to rest here and be in the moment, and to really start watching thoughts come and go. And if that's not there, it's going to be hard, because you can't manufacture you can't fake readiness. So if it's there, then assuming that it's there for any of the reader or the listeners that are listening, what you have to do if you have that readiness is just to become more skillful at it. So, meaning, there are different ways to kind of come back to presence. A simple way, I mean, a guy just the other day said that sometimes he can just kind of take a couple of breaths, and somehow the out breath gets him out of his head and kind of brings him back to the moment. Just a couple of breaths is all he needs, and then he's there and he can kind of look around the room and be with things without labeling them and let his system calm down. So that's a portal for him. Um, a portal for me was just noticing when I'm thinking, and then noticing that most of the time what I'm thinking isn't very functional. It's just storytelling thinking. And then every time I would see a storytelling type thought, I would just casually glance at it, not even really interested much in its content, more just interested in seeing that it's there, and then turning back to resting as awareness and letting that thought just fall away and sticking with uh, just the awareness for a moment. And again, looking around the room and without that idea or that story, just feeling what it's like to be here, present and awake, coming back and again. Um,
So part of resting in awareness is not being caught up in thought.
Part of it is, but if you can get to the place where when thought arises that you can see it, it's not that big of a deal. It's just an arising that comes through. If you don't see it, it hooks you and you start believing it. But if you see it, again, because whatever you look at, you diminish the power of it. So just a gentle noticing for a brief period of time, just a gentle, brief noticing of a thought can diffuse it enough for it to begin to fall away, unless it's strongly triggered to the body,
Hmm.
right? But a lot of thoughts aren't. They're just random thoughts that kind of come through, so you can just kind of notice them and let them go. But when you really feel something in your body with the thought, that's when you've got to do some more skillful practice. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to move through that trigger as easy.
Okay. It'll take you back into the past or into worry about the future. You
Yes,
can't be in.
yeah.
Yeah.
Spinning more stories
Yeah.
and making
So
it work often.
yeah, let's go more deeply into that. So if someone is really triggered, there's a strong energy in the body. What do they do then?
So one thing we have that I've been doing lately with people is something called the dance. And all of this comes from my spine pain. All of these things got developed because of dealing with intense spine pain. And what's so nice about that is because the pain was so intense that I feel like I developed methods that can help people deal with pretty and painful things,
Hmm.
because I was dealing with a really painful thing. So I feel like you can trust these tools, but you have to be very skillful and you have to really listen to my instructions to really feel into it, because it's very subtle, nuanced ways of being in the body. But one is just called the dance. So if you think about what a slow dance is, like you watch two people slow dance, there always has to be a leader. It could be the woman, it could be the man. If it's two men, somebody's got to lead the dance, right? And then the other person has to follow, because if both people try to lead the dance, it's a mess. It doesn't work. So part of the beauty of it is this synchronicity, this sort of flow, where one person is following and being led by the other person. That's what makes it such a beautiful dance. And so if you think of your body the same way, as you feel down into a sensation or emotion, it is the leader of the dance completely. It gets to do whatever it wants to do. If it wants to sidestep here, if it wants to get bigger, smaller, and then your attention, which is inside of it, is the follower of the dance. So it's a literal dance. So it's like, let's say the sensation gets bigger and bigger. Your attention is inside of it, and it's almost like helping it and support it get bigger and bigger. And this is why I think so many people are deeply contracted into the body, is because they're doing it the exact opposite way that it should be done.
Mm-hmm.
So they go into the body and they expect that there's already an expectation that it should be going away, and the mere expectation can keep it around, right?
Hmm.
And then even when they think they have the expectation gone, there's still often a layer of resistance that they don't even notice that's down deep inside. So once you have them bring their attention into the feeling and you let their attention dance with the movement of that, or even if it's stuck, let your attention be stuck and help and support it, being like literally helping it and supporting it in whatever it's doing. What it does is it reduces or eliminates the resistance around that so that thing can finally move. It can't move as long as you're trying to get it to move. So it's a process of doing less, 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 not more. And the dance is one way to achieve it. And then from that, a very similar tool is called metaphysical hands, which is also like a dance. So let's say you've looked at a bunch of pictures of some traumatic event that got pulled up through reverse inquiry or something. And then now you've tapped or you've witnessed those thoughts and they've fallen away, but you find that there's like this lump in your chest where you're holding emotion or energy from the story. Well, oftentimes non dual teachers or meditation teachers will simply say, come down and just feel and be with that. But over the years, I learned that it's not a very it's not a very specific instruction, really. In fact, a lot of people, I think, they think they're resting with it, but what they're doing is they're resting with Velcro still, meaning there's still thoughts that they're ruminating on, which is keeping it there, or there's a resistance there that they're not aware of. So by using these hands around that reduces that and helps them um um how should I say, helps them. It's more specific language is what it is, because if you just say rest with it, that language alone might not account for the fact that there's this resistance that you don't know is going on in there. But when you say it in very specific terms and you say, feel into it and let the attention move with or dance with the sensation, like wherever it goes, that specific instruction can be all the difference that makes it move for some reason. And so with metaphysical hands, it's just a matter of imagining two hands, not your real hands, but like if you have that feeling in the chest that I was talking about, is imagining two imaginary hands coming around and just holding it. And so when they hold it, the key is never to let the hands try to control or direct what it's doing. It's a dance. So that feeling or sensation must have the right and the space to move and do whatever it wants to do. And the hands are simply like just supporting its movement, almost helping its movement, which is opposite of what we would think we want to do in the body, right? We want to manipulate it to go away. But if you actually use your hands to go with it, like literally helping it, resistance gets reduced or eliminated in that, and it can fall away that way. So that's the one thing, the takeaway for the body stuff is that almost everything you do that tries to get rid of it can either keep it the same or make it worse. But
Hmm.
the more you support it, help it, love it, um, be in no way against it, be for it, the more it falls away. And it's so counterintuitive that people just haven't caught on to it yet, and they have to be trained to understand this and
Right.
to change the way they relate to the body.
Hmm. So I'm just thinking back to the Thank You for Arising practice from several years ago. It's another way of welcoming what is and not trying to get rid of it.
Yes, and that still works. I It's amazing how much that works.
Mhm.
And I stopped using it for a while because I thought, "This is too easy. How could this work so well?" But it's the same principle. It's like there's something inside of us that we're not aware of that doesn't want something to arise, that doesn't love it and wants it to go away. And it's like an operating system. It's an intelligence that says, "I don't like this, get rid of it." But you
Yeah.
can change or you can tweak that intelligence by simply feeling into the sensation and saying, "Thank you for arising. I love you. You're welcome to stay." Because that messes with the operating system. And so then once the operating system kind of hears that, it's like, well, and then there could be a letting go of that. Not every time, but at least a loosening up of that. And then sometimes it can dissolve it completely. But if it doesn't dissolve it completely, you can use the metaphysical hands or the dance to increasingly rest with it. And so I feel like we're getting just really good at a strange combination of things, which is one, learning how to help people be in the body in a really skillful way. That's the one thing, to be in the body in a really skillful way. And two, we're helping them not have to spend years and years and years and years at looking at thought after thought after thought after thought, just waiting for this. Instead, what we're doing is we're trying to bring them all up right now, just bring them all up, and then help you in a way that doesn't re-traumatize you as we're helping you, so that we don't bring it up so fast that you're overwhelmed and now you're in a bad place. We bring it up gently and we go thorough enough so that at least on that topic you're going to be in a good place on that topic by the end of it. It's not going to help all your trauma in that session, but because we're focusing so specifically on a particular trauma, we can really work with that trauma well, you know. Um, and that's another difference with the KI, because at the Kiloby Center, we didn't have the luxury of skipping around all over places, different places, because what was often driving the addiction was a particular set of traumas. So
Mhm.
we had to stay with those traumas, almost like beating a dead horse, because if we didn't, that person was going to pick heroin back up. And so
Yeah.
we learned the value of going deep. And the metaphor that I often say is like, if a frog is simply jumping from lily pad to lily pad, never jumping in the water, it's a surface level kind of way of being with things.
Mhm.
So if you're simply just with whatever happens to be arising, there's probably a chance that there's a lot that's repressed and unconscious that just isn't arising. So you're just jumping on the surface of things of what is arising, and I think that can leave you in a place where your conditioning stays intact. Whereas if you stay on the first lily pad, say the first lily pad is all the trauma that dad put in my life, and you work with that lily pad and that trauma very deeply and very thoroughly before you jump off to mom or to the next lily pad, you're going to leave people in a place that's much better than just skipping from one thing to the other in a disconnected way. So there's a much more systematic approach to this in that way than I think other modalities have in the
Mhm.
inquiry non-dual world.
We tend to think that there's something trying to hurt us. Like if a sensation is painful, it's here to hurt us.
Yeah.
And by welcoming it, we see that in fact it's here to protect us or to tell us something.
Yes.
Then we can actually welcome it. It's like getting to know ourselves.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Chester and I were just talking about that yesterday. Because like me, he had a very strong fight with hard drugs at one point. And they're not here to hurt us, but more than that, sometimes they're here to keep us alive and to
Yeah.
help us survive.
Mhm.
Because my own partner came to that insight just yesterday. He's like, all my life I've vilified my hard drug use. I made myself into a bad person. He said, but what would have happened to me if I'd not had those drugs?
Mhm.
I'd be dead because I couldn't live on this earth with that pain. And so, again, we're getting off topic into the kind of the new model of recovery. But if you could really nurture people to stop feeling bad
Mm.
about the drug use and to understand and put it in context as to why it happened. It happened because you were trying to survive, and
Right.
that deserves compassion, not stigma, not judgment, not punishment. You're
Mm.
trying to survive. Why would anybody be trying to punish you for that?
Yes.
So instead, what you need is love. And so what I've given him is love and support during his, and he's given me love and support during my, instead of blaming and going at each other, we're trying to see the deeper reasons for these things. The reasons we were using drugs or that he had a drug problem is because he had to survive. And then
Mhm.
once that compassion is there, then we don't have to judge each other anymore over any of that. We understand that that's just how we had to survive. So imagine if everybody could have that viewpoint and see that people who are overeating or sex they're not bad people. They're not gluttonous people.
Mhm.
They're just surviving. That's the way their system survives. And so when they come to us, we don't want to lecture them. We don't want to beat them down. We don't want to give them a plan and say, if you don't stick to it, there's going to be consequences, because that's just more beating up for something that they're just trying to survive over. What
Right.
we want to do is we want to give them what they've never had before, which is unconditional love and support, and then use the inquiries to unravel the stuff that drives them towards those things. And that's what feels so sane about the whole thing. It's like,
Mhm.
but having said that, and I know I'm talking a lot, there's something that people have to understand about the way that we work with addiction is that in the old model, if you stop drinking for a number of months or years or whatever, you're successful. Okay. Here it's different because if you've stopped drinking simply because of pressure that somebody's placing on you or because you think you're supposed to not drink, it's not going to go as deep into your whole system. But when you do this new model type of inquiry where you're really going to the pain underneath it, like you're unraveling that pain that drove you to that addiction. It's not like then you just decide one day, I'm going to self-will myself and I'm going to stop doing drugs. What happens is that your body starts to change. You start resolving those feelings in the body, and then your body starts saying, no, the Kiloby inquiries are all designed to do this, to achieve this goal. So it's connected to all this.
Yes. It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you went through the simple inquiry and tapping,
Mhm.
and the dance of working with energy in the body, and
The reverse inquiry.
the reverse inquiry, right?
Yeah. And
What
then
else?
and the dance, yeah.
Yeah. And what else do you want to cover?
And then we covered the metaphysical hands, which is a form of the dance. And for
Yeah.
people who missed that, you can just listen to the recording and hear it again. Um, Another thing we developed is we noticed that um, for those of you like me and you and I have been long-term meditators and mindfulness practitioners. So
Mhm.
you and I can um, we can do this work. We hear an instruction and we can watch a thought, or somebody says come down in the body, and we can do that. A lot of other people can't do that. And so what happens for some people is that they get overwhelmed by racing thoughts. It's like for some of us who've done this work for a while, we can pull up sort of one picture and just sort of be with it, right? But for some people, when they get triggered, their mind starts shooting a lot of things out. And it's too much to witness. How would you witness things that are doing this like that?
Mhm.
So what we developed this style of tapping that keeps up with the momentum of the racing aspect of those thoughts. So the thoughts are racing at a certain momentum, and you can't witness them because of that. So what we taught people to do is just to tap continuously here. Close your eyes, and as you see those thoughts out there, just witness them and bring them into the tapping zone one at a time, and drop them into the tapping zone and that one at a time, that picture into the tapping zone. And as soon as you drop it into the tapping zone, focus only on tapping for a few seconds. And then go out and reach to the next thought that's trying to race through and grab it with your awareness and bring it into the tapping zone. So what you're doing then is you're witnessing, which is important. You want to see the thought, but you're also helping to drop it. the moment that you switch to the tapping here. And what that can do is it can, within a relatively short period of time, take a racing mind to a quiet mind.
Right.
And so once the racing mind has turned to a quiet mind, we can take people down again into the body to where the real source of the pain is and then work on that level. Um, so that's the clearing method is what we use in those situations. And the other version of the clearing method is that for about half the population, the clearing method does work a bit like a magic pill. And then for the other half, it doesn't work at all. Um, but the clearing method, I'll explain it to you if you want. I don't mind people knowing about it. Um, let's say you have a heart contraction, a real tightness here in the heart. For some reason, some of us store memories here on our left side. I don't know why that is. I discovered it in myself. It may have something to do with the fact that the way we read and write from sort of left to right, like left is past and right is future. I don't know what that is, but if there's a heart contraction that's very stubborn, sometimes I'll have people shift their awareness out of the contraction and over to the space that's on the left side of the body that correlates right outside of that, so that they're actually looking at that space out there. And then I ask them, do you see anything? Do you see a mental impression? Do you see a shape? Do you see a face, a memory? If you see anything, drag and drop one at a time those things into the tapping zone. And as soon as you drop it, notice tapping for a few seconds and keep dragging everything in that space on that left side of your body until there's nothing there, until it's cleared, hence the name clearing method.
Yeah. Mhm.
And then once it's cleared, for the people that it works for, the contraction dissolves immediately.
Mhm.
It's just gone. And then for the people that it doesn't, it just means that that's not where they were storing the memories or something. That just wasn't the place to go.
Mhm.
But you can, for those who are listening, just try it and see if it works for you to help
Mhm.
um, decrease those contractions.
So a few different ways of doing a drag and drop into the tapping zone.
Right.
Right.
Right. Another one is focus shifting. And focus shifting is, again, we had to develop this for people who were being re-traumatized or overwhelmed by certain images. Like I worked with a police officer who, I think I've told you the story, who was called into Walmart and a baby was dying and the police officer had to try to save the baby's life. So that was an example of where that image of the baby being dead was burned into her brain.
Mhm.
And so um, we had to develop ways to unhook things that are that sticky. I mean, really, really sticky. But anyway, there could be one image or set of words by itself that is so strong that all you have to do is sort of just drag and drop that same picture or set of words several times in the tapping zone
Yeah.
until it weakens its grip on you. And then as it weakens its grip on you and it begins to fall away, then you can start to explore the trauma in the body. I can't remember whether I did that with her, but I do know that I had to do a lot of work um, just unsticking her from that picture because otherwise I couldn't get her into her body. Her body was,
Right.
without saying who it was, her body, she couldn't get in there. It was too much up here. So
Mm.
a lot of the KI tools are really about getting the focus out of here so that we can get in our bodies and feel what we've been avoiding. And that's
Right.
another example there. The focus shifting is about, uh, again, for those people who are early in recovery, especially, but it happens to people at any age, where there's a really, really traumatic image, like the police officer. Um, so another thing I could have done with her, but we didn't have focus shifting at the time, is I could have had her look at the picture of the baby and then shift focus to different things. So maybe I'd have the picture of the baby between the hands, and I'd have her look at the baby picture there, and then I might have her look through the space of the hands to the wall on the other side briefly, and then come back maybe to looking at the picture between the hands, or then maybe shifting to just look at for a moment a small detail on one of the hands, and then shifting back to maybe a small detail on the other hand. But you can literally just shift focus in different places away from the picture, coming back to the picture every time, because every time you come back to it, it weakens its identification as you're shifting focus. And that gives you more distance from the thought of just shifting focus around in different places on walls, hands everywhere. And then once you get distance from the thought, it's easier for it to fall away so you can, again, once again, get in the body where the real issue is.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And then when we're in our bodies, we're working with the dance, the metaphysical hands. What other ways can people work with energy?
Well, one is just the good old non-dual way. If you can truly just rest with it and be very quiet without thoughts on it, like there's a subset of the population which, again, as I call it, can do a sort of a magic pill, which is they can be highly triggered about something and have a lot of thoughts about it, but for some reason they're able just to, instead of focusing on the thoughts, they just shift their attention straight to the feeling, and they just feel it directly without hiding from it in their thoughts anymore, without trying to
Mhm.
rationalize it or be right in the head anymore. They're just with the energy and resting with it. And frankly, a lot of times that's all you need. You don't need um, the metaphysical hands or the dance, because sometimes resting with it is enough. But as practitioners, we're always trying to become more skilled. So we have to recognize those situations when resting with something is not enough. And we have to, because there's resistance down there that we have to
Right.
work with these tools, or there's some still thoughts, words, pictures that are connected to that feeling that we have to unhook from that feeling before they can get relief down in the body from the trauma. So then I had to struggle with bringing all of these hand tools in. This was a real challenge for me. People think, oh, Scott just willingly started using all these hand gestures, and it was not that way. I resisted it, I'll tell you. But
Mhm.
now that I've had 4 years of doing it, I know that it works, and so I'm comfortable. But at first, I was very apprehensive, though.
Mhm. Well, so it's quite a simple thing, although it's not easy, but it's simple because we're working with thoughts in the mind.
Yeah,
And once the thoughts in the mind have dissolved, they don't have the power over us, and we go into the body and we feel that. And there might be more thoughts come up which we could work with.
right.
We go back in the body and then it dissolves.
It dissolves. And
Yeah.
then and then on top of that, because that's the way you might do it in sort of more formal inquiry, on top of that, throughout the day, if we're simply just resting in the moment and being aware of what we're thinking and just noticing it and letting it go, um,
Mhm.
then we are actually living in presence. That's what awakening is. That's what it is, really, is to
Mhm.
be able to not identify with every thought and feeling that's coming through and just let it come through. So
Right.
it's the rest and the inquiry. It's, for me, it's not just the inquiry.
Mhm, mhm. And then the last part of your rest and choir is enjoy life.
Exactly, and I am. I'll tell you, even with all the pain that I've been with,
Mhm,
and of course I have a really great new relationship which contributes to my happiness. But the
mhm,
real happiness for me has come from KI,
mhm.
because there's just things that I did not see about myself that KI helped me see. I just saw one this morning that opened my eyes. And when I find that place that I haven't seen before, and I know I have a tool that I can take right into it, the feeling after that, when I feel like that's gone, it's just like, Gandhi used to say, "There's no end to the depth of this freedom,"
Mm,
and I know what she means now, because I thought that once you recognize awareness, like Eckhart, like you live in presence, um, that's the end of the depth of freedom. But what I found is that it's an unfolding, it's an exploration, and there really is no depth of freedom. And if you think you're enlightened today, keep inquiring and see what happens a year from now, how you feel. Keep
mhm,
exploring and see how you are 5 years from now. And you don't have to worry about that being about seeking. if you will learn and use the work to deconstruct that seeker identity and just live
Right.
from awareness and continue to look at these issues. The KI, some of the KI breakthroughs are not like the you can have satori experiences from resting in awareness and doing this stuff, but there's a different result that happens with KI, which I have to say happens more on the human level.
Hmm.
It, there's almost like a, it's hard to say, it's almost like a transcendence back into the human experience rather than a transcendence away from it.
Right. Hmm.
I, even if, I don't even know if that makes sense, but it's like you're transcending the way that you used to act and behave and think in the world, and then you're coming back in transformed so that you can meet those situations from a different place.
Right.
A very in It's hard to articulate how powerful that is, but just in the area of shame, for example, like 6, 7, 8 years ago, I could never share about some of the very shameful things about myself. But I took the KI inquiries and I went straight into shame for so long that now you can't get me to shut up about myself. Like I'm just every time I every time someone interviews me, I'm just telling on myself all the time and telling like what my life is really like. Like I
Right.
get triggered by my boyfriend. Like I've
Yeah.
had really bad, crappy pain for a year. I've had to take painkillers every day. I'm just telling on myself so that, and the reason I can do that is because we have tools that can go straight to shame, whereas the non-dual
Mhm.
teachings, they don't specify, they don't go directly to specific things like that. And I needed something that went straight to shame alone to be able to speak more openly. And that's the kind of freedom I just couldn't get anywhere else,
Right.
you know?
Yeah. Well, that seems like a good note to close on.
Yeah,
Freedom.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Was there any other last kind of things that you'd like to bring forward?
Well, I just want to let people know some good things that are happening. I'm working with people online to a limited degree. I know you do too, and I want you to let people know that because you've been such an asset to everything we've done. I want people to know how skilled you are too. So I want you to talk about yourself.
Work I do living inquiries work and a lot of the same tools that you're doing in Kiloby inquiries.
Yeah,
And specialize in working with people with trauma.
yeah.
I'm also a meditation teacher, so I have that breathing relaxation piece as well that you bring in.
So one thing we're working on is a Kiloby online inquiry center, which is really exciting. So
Mhm.
we want to bring everybody from the LI community who wants to be involved and everybody from the KI community and join them together and create this very structured sort of safe place for people to come, not just for addiction, but for anything. And
Mhm.
once they pay their sort of monthly membership, they have access to live groups, inquiry courses, pre-recorded inquiry courses, sessions, group inquiry, just kind of sit around talk meetings, like literally a center that doesn't have a physical location. It's everywhere.
Right.
And so we're really, really looking for earnest people who are not only interested in their own deepening, but really want to help people.
Mhm.
And we want to train those people. And so
Mhm.
we've been training people in KI and LI for a number of years. So one thing we're doing is training. So if you're interested in getting involved in something like that, I'm training people now. I have a training that starts in early January. Um, and to learn more about that, just email me at kilobyinfo@gmail.com. Once you're trained in that, if you're certified, then you can become, if you wish, a main player, one of the main players on this online inquiry center. There's a number of opportunities for you, but also you can just deepen personally. That's enough reason right there for it.
Right.
Um,
Mhm.
or you could also just become your own facilitator. You don't have to join the online center. You could just go like you've got a full client base. You don't need that. You can just go
Right.
um, work with those clients. So we have that going online. We're really excited about that. People can still do sessions with me. They email me at kilobyinfo, same one, at gmail.com, kilobyinfo at gmail.com. Um, I'm going to be doing a trauma workshop in the early 2020 with another KI facilitator named Matt Nettleton, who's a trauma therapist, which should be good. So look for that. Um, we are always looking for investors to open up treatment centers using our model. So if there's anybody out there who resonates with what I'm talking about and is interested in investing, we're looking for people who can help us fund new centers that have this new attitude and approach towards addiction. Um, and preferably not someone in California. California is not a great state to open a treatment center right now, but if you live in a different state and you're interested in this, again, kilobyinfo@gmail.com, looking for investors. There may be some investors that want to invest into the online center um, because it's a good cause, it's going to help people, and it could be a good investment if it works out right. So we need funding to do what we're doing, and we need a lot of really earnest people who are devoted to learning these skills and helping other people. And see what else is going on. Um,
Do you have an update on your app, the pain management app?
yeah, it's kind of stopped. So I developed a pain management app which helps doctors oversee uh, patient medication intake, so it reduces the chance of overdose on opiates by the patient, and then it reduces the liability on the doctor if a patient makes a choice to overuse something. So that's still very much in the works, but we're waiting for funding. So if there's any investors out there who would really like to contribute to helping to curb the heroin epidemic, this
Right.
app goes a long way. Doctors are telling me of protecting them from liability and helping patients because 80% of people that are on heroin started off from painkillers from their doctors. So
Mm,
something has to be done because in the next 10 to 20 years, doctors are going to be sued like crazy in the United States if they don't pick up something. So
right.
MPM, this app that I developed, is designed to help them reduce their liability, but to also protect the patient from getting into the place where they need addiction treatment. So that's still in the works. We're just looking for investors. Well, thank you for having me. And what's coming up for me now is that I know a lot of people are afraid to look at trauma and scary stuff, and I see it every day. And if you hear this interview and you're inspired but also scared, I want to encourage you to take that step towards working with somebody who's skilled on it. Because even though it's scary to take that step, once you start taking that step, even though there's going to be pain along the way, the freedom that you're going to experience on the other side is so well worth it. And so before you have an objection to what we're saying, try it. Try it once. Try one session with somebody before you decide that it's not for you. Because I think this is as you know, a really experiential approach. You have to experience it to know whether it's going to work for you. So
Mhm.
that's my final word on it.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Scott. Hello, this is Lynn Fraser with the Kiloby Center Radical Recovery Summit. We are so excited to bring you the lineup for January 10th to 19th, 2020. Go to radicalrecoverysummit.com to see the new headliners for 2020 and to sign up. You can watch free January 10th to 19th or buy an all access pass.